You know that moment when your entire world crumbles because you dared to ask one simple question? When the people who are supposed to love you unconditionally turn into strangers overnight, all because you had the audacity to speak the truth they desperately wanted buried? Well, let me tell you about the day I discovered that sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do in a family isn't lying, cheating, or stealing. Sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do is simply ask why. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Amanda Parker, and this is the story of how asking about my sister's affairs got me thrown out of my own family, stripped of everything I thought I knew about loyalty and love, only to discover that my late grandmother had left me, the ultimate weapon for justice. This isn't just a story about betrayal. This is a story about how sometimes the universe has a twisted sense of humor, and how the very people who try to silence you end up giving you the loudest voice of all. The rain was hammering against the windows of our family home in Riverside, Oregon, that Tuesday evening in March when everything changed. I remember thinking how fitting it was that the weather matched the storm that had been brewing in our family for months. You see, I'd been noticing things, little things at first. The way my sister Nicole would disappear for hours during her supposed grocery runs. How she'd changed her phone password and started sleeping with it under her pillow. The way she'd panic whenever her husband Mike would come home unexpectedly from his business trips. But the real red flag? The way my parents, Rachel and Tom Parker, would immediately change the subject whenever I brought up Nicole's increasingly erratic behavior. It was like watching a carefully choreographed dance of denial, and I was the only one not invited to participate. That night, we were all gathered around the dinner table for our weekly family meal. It was supposed to be a tradition, a time for us to reconnect and share what was happening in our lives. But lately, these dinners had felt more like elaborate performances where everyone knew their lines except me. Nicole sat across from me, scrolling through her phone with a secretive smile that made my stomach turn. Mike was working late again, she'd explained with practiced ease, the same excuse she'd been using for weeks. I watched my parents nod along, accepting her explanation without question, and something inside me finally snapped. Maybe it was the way Nicole's eyes lit up when her phone buzzed with a text message she quickly hid from view. Maybe it was the exhaustion of pretending everything was normal when it clearly wasn't. Or maybe it was just the simple, bone-deep weariness that comes from being the only person in a room willing to acknowledge reality. "Nicole," I said, setting down my fork with more force than necessary. "Where do you really go when you say you're running errands? Because I saw you at the Riverside Hotel last Thursday afternoon, and I'm pretty sure they don't sell groceries." There. The silence that followed was deafening. It wasn't just quiet. It was the kind of silence that feels like a physical weight pressing down on your chest. Nicole's face went through a series of expressions, from shock to anger to something that looked almost like relief. But it was my parents' reaction that truly stunned me. Instead of concern or confusion, I saw something that made my blood run cold. Guilt. They already knew. "Amanda," my mother said in that tone she used to use when I was 5 and had been caught drawing on the walls. "That's enough." "Enough?" I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Enough of what? Enough of asking questions? Enough of caring about the fact that my sister is clearly having an affair while her husband is working his ass off to support their family?" Nicole finally looked up from her phone, her eyes blazing with fury. "You have no idea what you're talking about." "Really?" "Then explain it to me. Explain why you were at a hotel in the middle of the afternoon with a man who definitely wasn't Mike. Explain why you've been lying about where you go and what you do. Explain why our parents are sitting here acting like this is all perfectly normal." The look that passed between Nicole and my parents in that moment told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't a revelation to them. This was damage control. My father cleared his throat, his weathered hands fidgeting with his napkin. Amanda, honey, sometimes adult relationships are complicated. Sometimes there are things you don't understand. Don't understand? I stood up so abruptly that my chair scraped against the hardwood floor. I understand perfectly. Nicole is cheating on Mike. You both know about it, and instead of doing something about it, you're all ganging up on me for having the guts to say it out loud. You're being dramatic, Nicole said, but her voice lacked conviction. And even if what you think you saw was true, it's none of your business. None of my business? Mike is like a brother to me. He's been part of this family for 8 years. He loves you, Nicole. He trusts you. And you're betraying him while our parents help you cover it up. That's when my mother stood up, her face flushed with anger I'd rarely seen directed at me. That's enough, Amanda. You're out of line. I'm out of line? For caring about honesty? For giving a damn about integrity? You're out of line for sticking your nose where it doesn't belong, Nicole spat. You're out of line for making assumptions and accusations. You're out of line for disrupting this family with your self-righteous bullshit. I looked around. The table at these people I'd loved and trusted my entire life, and I realized I was looking at strangers. People who valued keeping secrets over keeping promises. People who would rather protect a lie than defend the truth. You know what? I said, grabbing my purse from the counter. You're right. This is your family dinner, your family secrets, your family dysfunction. But I won't be part of it anymore. Where are you going? My father asked, and for a moment, I heard genuine concern in his voice. I don't know, I said honestly. But I know I can't stay here and pretend this is okay. As I reached for the door handle, Nicole's voice followed me. Don't you dare say anything to Mike. If you ruin my marriage because of your petty jealousy... I turned around one last time, looking at my sister, really looking at her. When had she become this person? When had she become someone who would cheat on a good man and then threaten the person who caught her? Petty jealousy? I said quietly. Nicole, I'm trying to save your marriage. I'm trying to save you from becoming someone you'll hate when you look in the mirror. But if you think this is jealousy, then you really don't know me at all. I walked out into the rain without looking back, but I could hear their voices through the closed door, already strategizing, already planning how to manage the fallout of my outburst. It wasn't until I was sitting in my car in the driveway, rain streaming down the windshield like tears, that the full weight of what had just happened hit me. I had just lost my family. Not because I had done something wrong, but because I had done something right. Because I had refused to be complicit in a lie that was destroying someone I cared about. Because I had chosen honesty over harmony, truth over comfort. My phone buzzed with a text from my mother. Come back inside. We need to talk. But I knew what that talk would involve. It would be about keeping quiet, about minding my own business, about being a good sister and daughter by helping to cover up Nicole's betrayal. It would be about choosing family loyalty over moral integrity, and I simply couldn't do it. I drove through the rain-soaked streets of Riverside, not sure where I was going but knowing I couldn't go home. Not to my apartment, which was actually the guest house behind my parents' main house. Not to my old room upstairs, where I'd spent countless nights as a child believing that family meant safety, that love meant unconditional support, that doing the right thing would always be rewarded. I ended up at the Pine Valley Motel on the outskirts of town, a place I'd driven past 1,000 times but never imagined I'd need. The desk clerk, a tired-looking woman with kind eyes, took one look at my rain-soaked appearance and tear-stained face and didn't ask any questions. She just handed me a key to room 17 and told me the coffee in the lobby was free until midnight. Sitting on the edge of that motel bed, staring at the water stains on the ceiling and listening to the sound of traffic on the highway, I tried to process what had just happened. In the span of one dinner conversation, I had gone from being Amanda Parker, beloved daughter and sister, to Amanda Parker, family pariah. All because I had asked the wrong question at the wrong time. Or maybe, I thought as I finally fell asleep to the sound of rain on the motel roof, I had asked the right question at the right time, and they just weren't ready to hear the answer. What I didn't know then was that this was just the beginning. That my grandmother Helen, who had passed away 6 months earlier, had left me something in her will that would change everything. That the very family who had just cast me out for asking about affairs would soon discover that sometimes the person you underestimate is the one who holds all the cards. But that night, all I knew was that I was alone, broke and homeless, because I had dared to care about the truth. Little did I know that sometimes the universe has a way of rewarding people who refuse to compromise their integrity, even when it costs them everything they thought they wanted. The next morning brought the harsh reality of my situation into sharp focus. I woke up in that motel room with exactly $237 in my checking account, a credit card that was nearly maxed out, and the dawning realization that I had nowhere to go. My job as a freelance graphic designer barely covered my basic expenses even when I was living rent-free in my parents' guest house. Now, facing the prospect of finding actual housing, buying food, and maintaining some semblance of dignity, those savings felt like pocket change. I sat on the edge of the bed, scrolling through my contacts, trying to figure out who I could call. My college friends had all moved away from Riverside years ago, pursuing careers in bigger cities with better opportunities. My work acquaintances were just that. Acquaintances. And my family? Well, the silence from my phone spoke volumes about where I stood with them. But as I was getting dressed, preparing to face the day with no clear plan beyond checking out of the motel and figuring out my next move, my phone finally buzzed with a message. For a moment, my heart leaped, thinking maybe one of my family members had come to their senses overnight. Maybe my father had decided to play peacemaker, or my mother had realized that throwing me out for asking questions was an overreaction. Instead, it was a text from Mike. "Hey Amanda, haven't seen you around lately. Nicole mentioned you've been busy with work projects. Hope you're doing well. Coffee soon?" I stared at that message for a long time, feeling a complex mix of emotions wash over me. Here was Mike, Nicole's husband, the man I'd been trying to protect, reaching out with his characteristic warmth and concern. He had no idea that his wife was cheating on him. He had no idea that his in-laws were helping to cover it up. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. He had no idea that I had been exiled from the family for trying to expose the truth. And I realized that this was the real cruelty of the situation. Not only had my family chosen to protect Nicole's lies, but they had also ensured that I would be the one who looked like the problem. If I told Mike the truth now, after being thrown out for asking questions, it would look like revenge. It would look like a bitter, estranged sister trying to cause trouble out of spite. I typed and deleted a dozen different responses to Mike's text before finally settling on, "Hey Mike, things have been complicated lately, but I'd love to catch up soon. I'll let you know when I'm free." It wasn't a lie exactly, but it wasn't the truth either. And that compromise felt like another small piece of my integrity cracking away. I checked out of the motel and drove aimlessly through Riverside, trying to figure out my next move. The town had always felt small to me, but that morning it felt suffocating. Everywhere I looked, I saw reminders of the life I'd just lost. The coffee shop where my family met every Sunday morning after church. The park where we'd had countless family picnics. The little bookstore where my grandmother used to take me when I was young, where she'd buy me journals and encourage me to write down my thoughts and dreams. Thinking about my grandmother Helen brought a fresh wave of grief washing over me. She had been the one person in my family who had always encouraged me to speak my mind, to ask hard questions, to never settle for easy answers. Amanda, she used to say, The world has enough people who are willing to go along to get along. What it needs are people who are willing to stand up for what's right, even when it's uncomfortable. If she had been alive, I knew she would have supported me. She would have been proud of me for refusing to be complicit in Nicole's deception. She would have been disappointed in my parents for choosing peacekeeping over principle. And she would have been furious with Nicole for betraying not just her husband, but the values that our family was supposed to represent. But she wasn't alive, and I was facing this crisis alone. As I drove past the Willow Creek Community Center, I noticed a sign in the window advertising tutoring services for adult learners preparing for their GED exams. On impulse, I pulled into the parking lot and went inside. The director, a warm woman named Lisa Martinez, was posting flyers for upcoming classes when I approached her. "Excuse me," I said. "I saw your sign about tutoring. I'm wondering if you might need additional help." Lisa looked up from her flyers and smiled. "Actually, we're always looking for qualified tutors. Do you have experience in education?" I shook my head. "Not formally, but I have a degree in communications, and I've always been good at helping people understand complex concepts. I'm also proficient in several computer programs that might be useful." Something in my voice must have conveyed my desperation because Lisa's expression softened. "Are you okay? You look like you've had a rough night." And there it was, the first genuine human kindness I'd experienced since walking out of my family's house. From a complete stranger who had no reason to care about my problems, no obligation to show me compassion. I felt tears welling up in my eyes before I could stop them. "I'm sorry," I said, wiping my face with the back of my hand. "I'm going through a difficult time right now, and I really need work." "Any work?" Lisa set down her flyers and gestured toward her office. "Come on, let's talk." Over the next hour, I found myself telling Lisa more than I had intended. Not the specific details about Nicole's affair. That felt too private, too much like gossip, but the broader strokes of my situation. How I'd had a falling out with my family over a matter of principle. How I was suddenly homeless and nearly broke. How I needed to find a way to support myself while I figured out my next steps. Lisa listened without judgment, nodding occasionally, and asking thoughtful questions. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment before speaking. "Amanda," she said, "I've been running this community center for 12 years, and I've learned to recognize something in people. You have integrity, real integrity. Not the kind that people talk about, but the kind that actually costs something. And right now, that integrity has cost you a lot." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. "Here's what I can offer you," Lisa continued. "We have a small budget for tutoring services, and we're always short-handed. The pay isn't great, $15 an hour to start, but it's honest work helping people who really need it. We also have a small apartment above the center that we usually use for storage, but it has a kitchenette and a bathroom. It's not fancy, but it's clean and safe. If you're interested, you could stay there temporarily while you get back on your feet." I stared at her, hardly believing what I was hearing. "You would do that for me? You don't even know me." Lisa smiled. "I know enough. And sometimes people need a second chance, not because they've done something wrong, but because they've done something right at the wrong time." That afternoon, I moved my belongings, which fit easily into 2 suitcases and a few boxes, into the small apartment above the Willow Creek Community Center. It wasn't much, a studio space with a fold-out couch, a tiny kitchenette, and a bathroom. That had seen better days. But it was mine, at least temporarily, and more importantly, it was a place where I could rebuild my life on my own terms. My first tutoring session was with a man named Carlos, a construction worker in his 40s who was working toward his GED so he could qualify for a promotion at his company. He was nervous and apologetic about his math skills, convinced that he was too old to learn new concepts. But as we worked through algebra problems together, I watched his confidence grow. When he finally grasped a concept that had been frustrating him for weeks, the smile on his face was worth more than any paycheck I'd ever received. "You know," he said as we packed up after our session, "my daughter's been telling me I should go back to school, but I always thought I was too stupid. You make me feel like maybe I'm not." "Carlos," I said, "you're not stupid. You're brave. It takes courage to admit what you don't know and work to change it. That's not stupidity. That's wisdom." As he left that day, I realized something important. For the first time in months, I felt useful. I felt like I was making a difference in someone's life, contributing something positive to the world. It was a far cry from the graphic design work I'd been doing, creating marketing materials for businesses I didn't particularly care about. This work mattered. Over the next few weeks, I threw myself into tutoring with an energy and passion that surprised me. I worked with teenage mothers trying to finish their education, older adults pursuing career changes, and immigrants working to improve their English skills. Each person had a story, a dream, a reason for being there that went beyond just getting a diploma. There was Maria, a young mother who had dropped out of high school when she got pregnant and was now determined to set a good example for her daughter. There was James, a veteran who was struggling with PTSD but refused to give up on his goal of becoming a teacher. There was Susan, a woman in her 60s who had always regretted not finishing her education and decided it was never too late to try. Working with these students gave me perspective on my own situation. Here were people who had faced real hardships, poverty, discrimination, trauma, loss, and they were still fighting for their dreams. My family problems, while painful, paled in comparison to what some of these people had endured. Yet they showed up every day, ready to work, ready to learn, ready to believe in a better future. But even as I found purpose in my new work, the silence from my family continued to sting. No calls, no texts, no attempts to reconcile or even check on my well-being. It was as if I had simply ceased to exist the moment I walked out of their house that rainy night. The only exception was an occasional text from Mike, still trying to maintain our friendship despite the awkwardness of the situation. He would send me funny memes or ask about my work, clearly unaware of the true reason behind my sudden distance from the family. Each message was a reminder of the secret I was carrying, the truth I couldn't tell without destroying any chance of reconciliation. With my family, 3 weeks into my new life at the community center, I received a call that would change everything. It was from Brian Cooper, a lawyer I'd never heard of, asking if I could come to his office to discuss my grandmother Helen's estate. "I'm sorry," I said, confused. "But my grandmother's will was already read. That was handled months ago." "Ms. Parker," Brian said carefully, "there was a second will, a more recent will that your grandmother filed privately just before her death. I've been trying to reach you for weeks, but the address and phone number I had on file were no longer current." My heart started racing. "A second will?" "Yes, and according to this document, you are the primary beneficiary of some very significant assets. Can you come in tomorrow morning?" I hung up the phone with shaking hands, my mind racing, with possibilities and questions. What assets? Why hadn't my family mentioned a second will? And why had my grandmother left me anything when she had other grandchildren and her own children who might have needed her help? That night, I lay awake in my small apartment above the community center, staring at the ceiling and trying to process this unexpected development. In just a few weeks, I had gone from beloved family member to exile, from comfortable dependence to struggling independence, from familiar routine to uncertain future. And now, there was another twist in a story that already felt too strange to be real. I thought about my grandmother, about the conversations we'd had in the months before her death. She had seemed different somehow, more focused on making sure I understood certain things about family, about loyalty, about the difference between keeping peace and keeping secrets. At the time, I had attributed it to the natural reflectiveness, that comes with age and illness. Now I wondered if she had been trying to prepare me for something. Whatever tomorrow would bring, I knew one thing for certain. My life was about to change again. And this time, I had a feeling that the change would be entirely in my favor. The law office of Carter and Associates occupied the third floor of a historic brick building in downtown Portland, about 40 minutes from Riverside. As I sat in Brian Cooper's waiting room the next morning, I tried to calm my nerves by focusing on the details around me. The rich mahogany furniture, the oil paintings of stern-looking judges, the thick Persian rug that probably cost more than I'd made in the past 6 months. Everything about this place screamed old money and established power, which made me acutely aware of my thrift store blazer and scuffed shoes. When Brian finally called me into his office, I was surprised by his appearance. I'd expected someone older, more intimidating, but Brian Cooper looked to be in his early 50s with kind eyes and a genuinely warm smile. He offered me coffee and made small talk about the drive from Riverside before settling behind his impressive desk with a thick manila folder. "Ms. Parker," he began, "I want to start by expressing my condolences on the loss of your grandmother. Helen Carter was an extraordinary woman, and I had the privilege of knowing her for over 20 years. "Thank you," I said, still confused about why I was there. "But I have to ask, why didn't my family know about this second will? Why am I here alone?" Brian's expression grew serious. "Your grandmother was very specific about her wishes regarding this matter. She wanted this will to remain confidential until certain conditions were met. According to her instructions, I was only to contact you if you were no longer living at your family's property." My stomach dropped. She knew? She knew they would. Kick me out? "Your grandmother was an astute judge of character, Amanda. May I call you Amanda?" When I nodded, he continued. "She came to see me 3 months before she passed away. She was concerned about certain dynamics within your family, and she wanted to ensure that her most important legacy would be protected." He opened the folder and pulled out a document that looked official and intimidating. "Helen Carter's revised last will and testament, dated February 15th of last year. In it, she leaves you sole ownership of something that your family doesn't even know exists." My hands were trembling as I leaned forward. "What kind of something?" Brian smiled, and I caught a glimpse of what might have been satisfaction in his expression. "Your grandmother owned a substantial investment portfolio that she managed privately for over 30 years. She started with the life insurance money from your grandfather's death and built it into quite an impressive nest egg through careful investing and reinvesting." He pulled out another set of documents, these ones covered in numbers and financial terms that made my head spin. "The current value of this portfolio is approximately $2.4 million. I'm pretty sure my heart stopped beating for a moment. "I'm sorry, what?" $2.4 million, give or take depending on market fluctuations. "But that's not all." Brian's smile widened. "Your grandmother also owned several properties that she purchased as rental investments over the years. 3 apartment buildings in Portland, a small office complex in Salem, and a vacation rental property on the Oregon coast." I sat there in stunned silence, trying to process what he was telling me. My grandmother, the woman who had lived modestly in a small house in Riverside, who had clipped coupons and shopped at thrift stores, who had always seemed to struggle financially, was actually wealthy. More than wealthy, she was rich. "How is this possible?" I finally managed to ask. "She never acted like she had money. She never spent money, we all thought." "She thought it was important to live below her means," Brian explained. "She wanted to build something lasting, something that could make a real difference. And she wanted to make sure it went to someone who would use it wisely." "But why me? Why not my parents, or Nicole, or—" Brian held up a hand to stop me. "Your grandmother left very detailed instructions about her reasoning. Would you like me to read them to you?" I nodded, not trusting my voice. Brian pulled out a handwritten letter, and I recognized my grandmother's careful script immediately. "Dear Amanda," he read aloud, "if you are hearing this letter, it means that you have found yourself in the position I feared you might one day face. It means that your integrity has cost you the comfort of family acceptance, and that you have chosen to do what is right rather than what is easy." Tears started flowing down my cheeks before I could stop them. "I have watched you grow into a young woman of remarkable character," Brian continued reading. "You have always been the one to ask difficult questions, to stand up for those who cannot stand up for themselves, to refuse to accept injustice even when it would be easier to look the other way. These qualities make you different from the rest of our family, and I suspect they have made your life more difficult as well." He paused to let me compose myself before continuing. "I have built this legacy not just for you, but because of you. Because I believe that you will use these resources to make the world a little bit better, a little bit more just. I have seen how you care for others, how you fight for truth even when it hurts, and I know that you will honor the responsibility that comes with this inheritance." Brian set down the letter and looked at me with gentle understanding. "There's more, but perhaps we should take a break." I shook my head, wiping my eyes with a tissue he'd quietly placed within reach. "Please, keep reading. I know that receiving this inheritance will come with challenges. Your family will not understand why you were chosen over them. They will likely be angry, confused, and possibly accusatory. But I need you to remember that this money comes with conditions that protect both you and the legacy I've built." Brian pulled out another document. "This is where it gets interesting from a legal standpoint. Your grandmother established what's called a discretionary trust. You have full access to the income generated by the investments, which currently amounts to approximately $15,000 per month. You also have access to the principal for specific purposes: education, starting a business, purchasing a primary residence, or other investments that the trustee approves." "Who's the trustee?" "You are, actually. But your grandmother was clever about this. She included provisions that prevent anyone from pressuring you into using the money in ways that go against your values. If anyone in your family attempts to manipulate, coerce, or threaten you regarding this inheritance, they automatically forfeit any claim to her other assets." I stared at him. "What other assets?" "The house in Riverside where your grandmother lived, along with all of her personal possessions, were left to your parents in the original will. But if they violate the terms of this trust by attempting to pressure you about your inheritance, those assets revert to you as well." The brilliance of what my grandmother had done was starting to sink in. She hadn't just left me money. She had created a situation where my family would have to treat me with respect if they wanted to keep what they thought was their inheritance. "There's one more thing," Brian said, pulling out a final document. "Your grandmother suspected that you might find yourself in a position where you needed immediate housing, so she purchased a small house in Portland 6 months before she died, and she's left it to you outright. No trust, no conditions. It's yours." I felt like I was dreaming, or maybe having a breakdown. "She bought me a house?" "A 2-bedroom cottage in the Hawthorne district, fully paid for, no mortgage. She had it renovated and furnished it herself, though she never told anyone what it was for. The neighbors thought she was preparing it as a rental property." Brian pulled out a set of keys and placed them on the desk in front of me. "The address is on this card. Your grandmother wanted you to have somewhere to go, somewhere that would be entirely yours, where no one could make you feel unwelcome or unsafe." I picked up the keys with shaking hands, feeling the weight of them, the reality of them. In the span of one conversation, I had gone from homeless and nearly broke to financially secure and homeowner. It was too much to process, too surreal to believe. "I don't understand," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "How did she know? How did she know I would need this?" Brian's expression grew sad. Your grandmother told me that she had spent her entire life watching your family's dynamics. She saw how your parents favored Nicole, how they enabled her behavior while expecting you to be the responsible one. She saw how Nicole took advantage of that favoritism, and she suspected it would eventually lead to a crisis. He leaned back, in his chair, studying my face. She also told me about a conversation she had with you about 6 months before she died. You had confided in her about some concerns you had regarding Nicole's marriage, some behaviors you'd observed that worried you. I remembered that conversation. It had been during one of my regular visits to help my grandmother with her grocery shopping. I had been feeling burdened by what I suspected about Nicole, unsure whether I should say something or mind my own business. My grandmother had listened without judgment, and then given me advice that had stayed with me. She told me to always choose truth over comfort, I said, remembering her exact words. Exactly. And she told me that she was proud of you for caring enough to be troubled by dishonesty, even when it would be easier to ignore it. She said that quality would probably cause you pain in life, but that it also made you someone worth investing in. Brian gathered the documents and placed them in a neat stack. So here's where we stand, Amanda. You are now worth approximately $3 million, including the house. You have a steady monthly income that will allow you to live comfortably while you decide what you want to do with your life. And you have the freedom to make choices based on your values rather than your financial needs. I sat there for a long moment, trying to absorb the magnitude of what had just happened. This morning, I had been Amanda Parker, the disgraced family member living above a community center and scraping by on tutoring wages. Now, I was Amanda Parker, millionaire property owner with the financial freedom to do whatever I wanted with my life. What happens next? I asked. Well, legally, nothing needs to happen immediately. The trust is already established, the properties are already in your name, and the investments are already generating income. But practically speaking, you might want to consider how and when you want to inform your family about this change in circumstances. The thought of my family's reaction made my stomach clench. How would they respond when they learned that the daughter they had dismissed and discarded was now wealthier than all of them combined? How would Nicole react when she realized that her younger sister, the one she had always looked down on, now had the resources to expose her secrets without fear of consequences? Do I have to tell them? Not legally, no. The terms of the trust are confidential unless you choose to disclose them. But Amanda, secrets have a way of coming out, especially in small towns. Eventually, they're going to notice that your circumstances have changed. As I left the law office that afternoon, my mind was spinning with possibilities and concerns. I drove through downtown Portland, following the address on the card Brian had given me, until I found myself parked in front of a charming craftsman-style cottage with a well-maintained garden and a bright red front door. My grandmother had somehow known exactly what I would need and want. The house was perfect, not too big, not too flashy, just a comfortable home in a neighborhood full of young professionals and small families. As I walked through the rooms, I found evidence of her careful planning everywhere. The furniture was simple but high quality. The kitchen was stocked with basic necessities, and there was even a small office space set up with a desk and computer. In the bedroom, I found one final surprise: a framed photo of my grandmother and me from my college graduation, along with another handwritten note. "My dearest Amanda," it read, "I hope this house brings you the peace and security that every person deserves. I hope it becomes a place where you can build the life you want, surrounded by people who value you for who you are rather than what you can do for them. Remember that true family is not always the family you are born into, but the family you choose and create. You deserve to be loved unconditionally, and you deserve to love yourself enough to demand that treatment from others. I am so proud of the woman you have become, and I am confident that you will use these gifts wisely. All my love, Grandma Helen." I sat on the edge of the bed, holding that note and crying tears that were equal parts grief and gratitude. My grandmother was gone, but somehow she was still taking care of me, still believing in me, still fighting for me even from beyond the grave. Over the next few days, I began the process of transitioning from my life at the community center to my new reality. I gave Lisa 2 weeks' notice, though I assured her that I wanted to continue tutoring on a volunteer basis. The work had become too important to me to abandon completely, and now that I didn't need the income, I could focus on helping students who couldn't afford to pay for tutoring services. I also began the delicate process of establishing some boundaries with my past. I changed my phone number and my address with various institutions, ensuring that my family couldn't easily track my movements or circumstances. I wasn't ready for the confrontation that would inevitably come when they learned about my inheritance, and I wanted to have time to process everything myself first. But even as I was settling into my new life, the old problems hadn't disappeared. Mike was still married to a cheating wife, still being betrayed by someone he loved and trusted. My parents were still enabling Nicole's behavior, still choosing to protect lies rather than defend truth. And Nicole was still out there, continuing her affairs, becoming more reckless and more confident that her secrets were safe. What none of them knew was that I now had the resources to expose everything without fear of the consequences. I had the financial security to weather any family storm, the independence to make choices based on principle rather than survival, and the freedom to finally tell Mike the truth about what his wife was doing behind his back. My grandmother had given me more than money and property. She had given me power. The power to choose truth over family loyalty, justice over keeping the peace, and integrity over comfort. And as I sat in my beautiful new home, surrounded by evidence of her love and foresight, I began to realize that maybe it was time to use that power. The question was no longer whether I should expose Nicole's affairs. The question was how I wanted to handle the reckoning that was coming. Because one way or another, the truth was going to come out. And when it did, my family was going to learn that disciplining me for asking about affairs had been the biggest mistake they could have made. After all, they had taught me that family loyalty was conditional, that love came with strings attached, and that doing the right thing would be punished rather than rewarded. But they had also unwittingly given me the freedom to act without fear of losing anything that mattered to me. I had already lost their love and acceptance. Now I had nothing left to lose and everything to gain by finally telling the truth they had worked so hard to bury. The reckoning was coming, and thanks to my grandmother's foresight and generosity, I would face it from a position of strength rather than vulnerability. Nicole and my parents had made their choices, prioritizing secrets and lies over honesty and integrity. Now it was time for them to face the consequences of those choices. And this time, I would be the one doing the disciplining. Living in my new house for 2 weeks had given me time to think, really think, about what I wanted to do with the information I had and the resources I now possessed. Every morning, I would sit with my coffee on the small back patio, watching the sunrise filter through the maple trees my grandmother had carefully selected for the garden, and I would wrestle with the weight of responsibility that came with power. The truth was, I could have walked away. I could have started fresh, built a new life far from Riverside and all its complications, and never looked back. With my inheritance, I had the freedom to travel, to pursue any career I wanted, to live anywhere I chose. I could have left Nicole, to destroy her own marriage and let my parents deal with the eventual fallout when her affairs inevitably came to light. But every time I considered that option, I thought about Mike. Kind, trusting Mike, who had been part of our family for 8 years, who worked 60-hour weeks to provide for Nicole and their future together, who still sent me friendly texts, asking about my life because he genuinely cared about my well-being. He deserved better than the deception he was living with, and he deserved to hear the truth from someone who cared about him, rather than discovering it in some humiliating public way. More than that, I realized that my grandmother hadn't given me financial independence just so I could run away from difficult situations. She had given me the resources to stand up for what was right without fear of the personal cost. And walking away from Mike's situation would be just another form of enabling Nicole's behavior. So I made a decision. I was going to gather concrete evidence of Nicole's affairs and present it to Mike in a way that would give him the information he needed to make his own choices about his marriage. But I was going to do it carefully, methodically, and in a way that couldn't be dismissed or explained away. The first step was understanding exactly what Nicole was doing and with whom. I knew she had been at the Riverside Hotel that Thursday afternoon, but I needed more than one suspicious sighting to build a credible case. I needed patterns, evidence, proof that would be undeniable even to someone who didn't want to believe it. I started by doing something I never thought I would do. I hired a private investigator. James Morrison came highly recommended by Brian Cooper, who had used his services for various legal cases over the years. James was a former police detective who specialized in matrimonial investigations, and he had the kind of professional demeanor that made me feel confident about his discretion and thoroughness. Meeting with James at his office in Portland felt surreal. Here I was, planning to spy on my own sister, paying someone to document her betrayals so I could expose them to her husband. A month ago, the idea would have been unthinkable. But a month ago, I had still believed that family meant something sacred, that blood relations came with inherent loyalty and protection. "What exactly are you hoping to accomplish with this investigation?" James asked as we discussed the scope of his work. "I want documented proof of my sister's extramarital activities," I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. "Photographs, video if possible, evidence of where she goes and who she meets. I want information that can't be explained away or dismissed." James nodded, making notes in his file. "And what do you plan to do with this information once I gather it?" "I'm going to give it to her husband. He's a good man who deserves to know the truth about what his wife is doing." "Have you considered that this might destroy their marriage?" I thought about that question for a long moment before answering. Her affairs are what's destroying their marriage. I'm just making sure he has the information he needs to understand what's really happening in his life. James studied me with the kind of careful attention that probably came from years of reading people in difficult situations. "This is clearly a painful decision for you. Are you sure you want to proceed?" "I'm sure," I said, and I meant it. My sister made her choices. My parents made theirs when they decided to help her cover up those choices. Now I'm making mine. Over the next 3 weeks, James proved to be worth every penny of his considerable fee. He was thorough, professional, and disturbingly effective at uncovering the extent of Nicole's deception. What he discovered was far worse than I had imagined. Nicole wasn't just having an affair. She was having multiple affairs, with multiple men in a pattern of behavior that had been going on for over 2 years. James documented her meetings with Kevin Walsh, a married real estate agent who worked in the same building as Nicole's accounting firm. He captured her lengthy lunches and hotel visits with David Chen, a divorced attorney she had met through work. Most shocking of all, he discovered that she was also involved with Marcus Torres, a younger man who worked as a personal trainer at the gym she had joined 6 months earlier. The evidence James compiled was devastating and comprehensive. Photographs of Nicole entering hotel rooms with different men, video footage of passionate kisses in restaurant parking lots, credit card records showing payments for hotel rooms, and expensive dinners at times when she had told Mike she was working late or running errands. Cell phone records revealing hundreds of text messages and phone calls to numbers that weren't in her official contacts list. But perhaps the most damning evidence was what James discovered about Nicole's finances. She had opened a secret credit card account using only her maiden name, and she was using it to fund her extramarital activities: hotel rooms, expensive dinners, gifts for her lovers, even a weekend trip to Seattle with Kevin Walsh while she had told Mike she was attending a work conference that didn't actually exist. The total amount she had spent on these deceptions over the past year was over $15,000. Money that she and Mike couldn't afford. money that was supposed to be going toward their savings for a house, money that Mike was working overtime to help provide. When James presented me with his final report, I sat in my kitchen and stared at the photographs and documents spread across my table. This wasn't just infidelity. This was financial fraud, emotional abuse, and a level of deception that went far beyond anything I had suspected. Nicole wasn't just cheating on Mike. She was systematically betraying every aspect of their relationship while making him complicit in funding her betrayals. Looking at that evidence, I felt something shift inside me. The last remnants of family, loyalty, the final hesitations about exposing Nicole's secrets simply evaporated. This wasn't about a moment of weakness or a single bad decision. This was about a calculated pattern of lies and manipulation that was stealing years from Mike's life and thousands of dollars from his bank account. The question now was how to present this information to Mike in a way that would be clear, undeniable, and supportive rather than vindictive. I spent several days considering different approaches before settling on a plan that felt both compassionate and comprehensive. I decided to invite Mike to lunch, somewhere public but quiet where we could talk privately. I would start by explaining my situation with the family, why I had been distant lately, and why he hadn't seen me around. Then I would tell him that I had information about his marriage that he needed to know, and I would give him the choice of whether to see the evidence or not. The lunch invitation itself proved more complicated than I had anticipated. Mike responded to my text immediately, expressing enthusiasm about finally catching up, but he suggested we meet at the family house so Nicole could join us. When I explained that I needed to speak with him privately, he seemed confused but agreed to meet me at a small cafe in downtown Riverside. Sitting across from Mike in that cafe, looking at his open, trusting face as he talked enthusiastically about a promotion he was hoping for at work, I felt the full weight of what I was about to do. This conversation was going to change his life forever. In the next hour, I was going to shatter his beliefs about his marriage, his wife, and probably his faith in love itself. But I also knew that living a lie wasn't really living at all. Mike deserved to make informed decisions about his life, and he couldn't do that without knowing the truth about what Nicole was doing. "Mike," I said, interrupting his story about a difficult client at work, "I need to tell you something important, and it's going to be hard to hear." Something in my tone must have alerted him because his expression immediately became serious. "Is everything okay? Are you sick? Is someone in the family hurt?" "In a way, yes. Someone in the family is hurt, but it's not what you think." I took a deep breath, trying to find the right words. "Mike, I need to tell you why I haven't been around lately, why I've been distant, why things have felt different." Over the next 20 minutes, I explained everything. The dinner conversation where I had confronted Nicole about her absences and suspicious behavior. My family's reaction to my questions. The way they had chosen to protect Nicole's secrets rather than support my concerns. My decision to leave rather than be complicit in the deception. Mike listened without interrupting, his expression growing, more troubled with each detail. When I finished explaining the family situation, he was quiet for a long moment before speaking. "Amanda, I'm so sorry. I had no idea any of this was happening. Nicole told me you were busy with work projects, that you were going through a difficult time and needed space. I never imagined." He trailed off, and I could see him starting to process the implications of what I had told him. "Mike, there's more. And this is the part that's really going to be hard to hear." I pulled out a manila envelope that contained a summary of James Morrison's findings, along with a selection of the most clear and undeniable photographs. I hired a private investigator to document what Nicole has been doing during those times when she says she's working late or running errands. Mike stared at the envelope like it might explode. "Amanda, what are you saying?" "I'm saying that Nicole has been having affairs, multiple affairs, with multiple men, for over 2 years, and I have proof." The silence that followed was deafening. Mike's face went through a series of expressions: confusion, disbelief, hurt, and finally a kind of resigned devastation that broke my heart. "Show me," he said quietly. I slid the envelope across the table. "Mike, you don't have to look at this right now. You can take it home, process it privately, decide what you want to do with the information. But I want you to know that everything in there is documented, verified, and undeniable." Mike opened the envelope with shaking hands and pulled out the summary report. As he read, I watched his face crumble. The photographs were arranged chronologically, showing a clear pattern of deception over months and months. The financial records showed the secret credit card and the thousands of dollars Nicole had spent on her affairs. When he finally looked up at me, there were tears in his eyes. "How long have you known?" I suspected something for months, but I didn't have proof until recently. "Mike, I'm so sorry. I know this is devastating, but you deserve to know the truth. Why didn't you tell me sooner? Why didn't you say something when you first suspected?" The pain in his voice was almost unbearable. "Because my family made it clear that asking questions about Nicole's behavior was unacceptable, because I was afraid that without proof, you wouldn't believe me, or that it would just cause problems without solving anything, because I was a coward who chose family peace over doing what was right." Mike closed the envelope and sat back in his chair, staring out the window at the quiet street beyond. 2 years. She's been lying to me for 2 years. "I'm sorry, Mike. I'm so incredibly sorry." "Don't apologize. You're the only person who cared enough about me to tell me the truth." He wiped his eyes with his napkin and looked at me directly. "What am I supposed to do now?" "That's entirely up to you. You can confront Nicole, you can talk to a lawyer, you can try marriage counseling if you think there's something worth saving. Or you can take time to process this and decide what you want your life to look like going forward." Mike nodded slowly. "I need to think. I need to figure out everything. If you need anything at all, please let me know. I know our family situation is complicated right now, but you're important to me, Mike. You've always been important to me." As we prepared to leave the cafe, Mike turned to me one more time. "Amanda, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Why did you do this? I mean, I'm grateful, but this must have been expensive and time-consuming, and it's probably going to make your family situation even worse. Why did you go to all this trouble for me?" I thought about his question as we walked toward our cars. Why had I done it? Why had I spent thousands of dollars and weeks of planning to expose my sister's secrets when I could have just walked away and started fresh somewhere else? "Because you deserved better," I said finally. "Because lying to someone you love is a form of abuse, and nobody deserves to live their life based on lies. Because the truth might hurt, but living a lie hurts more in the long run." Mike hugged me tightly before getting into his car. "Thank you, Amanda. I don't know what I'm going to do, but at least now I know what I'm dealing with." As I drove home to my beautiful house in Portland, I felt a complex mix of emotions. Sadness for Mike and the pain he was going through. Anger at Nicole for the years of calculated deception, disappointment in my parents for their willingness to enable destructive behavior. But underneath all of that, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. The clean, clear satisfaction that comes from doing the right thing regardless of the personal cost. I had given Mike the truth he deserved to have. Now it was up to him to decide what to do with it. What I didn't know was that Mike's reaction to the evidence would set off a chain of events that would expose not just Nicole's affairs, but the entire web of lies and enablement that my family had constructed around her behavior. The reckoning I had been anticipating was about to begin, and it would be far more dramatic and far-reaching than I had ever imagined. The truth, as my grandmother used to say, has a way of demanding justice. And justice, I was about to learn, sometimes comes with compound interest. Mike didn't wait long to act on the information I had given him. 3 days after our lunch meeting, I received a phone call that I had been both expecting and dreading. It was my mother, and her voice was shaking with a fury I had rarely heard directed at me. "What the hell have you done, Amanda?" she demanded without preamble. Mike showed up here with some ridiculous folder full of lies and accusations, and now Nicole is hysterical and threatening to leave town. What kind of sick revenge fantasy is this? I was sitting in my home office, reviewing some investment documents that Brian Cooper had sent me when the call came. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was literally looking at evidence of my financial independence, while my mother berated me for using that independence to expose the truth. "Hello. To you too, Mom," I said calmly. "I'm doing well, thanks for asking. The new living situation is working out great. Don't you dare get smart with me, young lady. You've crossed a line that can't be uncrossed. Whatever problems you think Nicole has, airing our family's private business to outsiders is unforgivable." Outsiders? I couldn't help but laugh at the absurdity of it. "Mom, Mike isn't an outsider. He's been part of this family for 8 years. He's Nicole's husband. And he had every right to know that his wife has been cheating on him with multiple men for the past 2 years." The silence on the other end of the line lasted so long that I wondered if she had hung up. When she finally spoke again, her voice was quieter, but somehow more menacing. "You have no idea what you've done to this family. No idea of the damage you've caused with your jealousy and your need for attention. Nicole made some mistakes, yes, but they were private mistakes that could have been handled privately." Private? Mistakes? I felt my own anger rising now. "Mom, she's been systematically lying to her husband, stealing money from their joint accounts to pay for hotel rooms with her lovers, and putting his health at risk by sleeping with multiple partners, without his knowledge. These aren't private mistakes. These are serious betrayals that affect Mike's entire life. Mike will get over it. Men always do. But what you've done to Nicole, what you've done to this family, that's permanent damage." The casual dismissal of Mike's pain, the automatic assumption that Nicole's well-being mattered more than his, crystallized everything I had come to understand about my family's dysfunction. They weren't just enabling Nicole's behavior, they were actively participating in it by treating her victims as acceptable casualties. "Where's Dad in all this?" I asked. "What does he have to say about his daughter's affairs?" "Your father is devastated. We both are. We raised you to be loyal to your family, to protect each other, to handle problems internally. Instead, you've chosen to destroy everything we've built, just to prove some twisted point about honesty. What you built was a house of cards based on lies and favoritism. I didn't destroy it, Mom. I just refused to keep holding it up." "Well, I hope you're proud of yourself. Nicole is talking about filing for divorce and moving to Seattle with that trainer boy. Mike is threatening to take legal action over the credit card debts. And your father and I are left to clean up the mess you created with your vindictive, little investigation." The fact that Nicole was already planning to run away with Marcus Torres, the personal trainer, told me everything I needed to know about her priorities. She wasn't fighting for her marriage or trying to repair the damage she had caused. She was planning her exit strategy, probably hoping to leave Mike with the debts and emotional wreckage while she started fresh with her latest conquest. "Mom, I have one question for you, and I want you to really think about your answer. If you were in Mike's position, if Dad had been cheating on you for years while you worked overtime to support the family, if he had been spending your savings on hotel rooms and expensive dinners with other women, would you want someone to tell you the truth? Or would you want everyone to keep lying to you to preserve family harmony?" Another long silence. When my mother finally answered, her voice was cold and final. "I would want my family to handle it appropriately. I would want the people who claim to love me to find a solution that didn't involve humiliating me and destroying my children's lives. And there it is," I said quietly. "You would want the lie to continue as long as it was convenient for everyone except the person being betrayed, That's exactly the kind of thinking that created this mess in the first place. Amanda, I'm going to say this once, and I want you to listen carefully. You need to fix this. You need to call Mike and tell him that you made a mistake, that you misunderstood what you saw, that the evidence was fabricated or taken out of context. You need to repair the damage you've done to Nicole's marriage. I felt something cold and hard settle in my chest. Are you seriously asking me to lie to cover up Nicole's affairs? Are you asking me to gaslight Mike into believing that documented evidence of his wife's infidelity is somehow fake? I'm asking you to be a daughter and a sister. I'm asking you to put your family first, the way you were raised to do. No, Mom. What you're asking me to do is be an accomplice to emotional abuse. You're asking me to help you convince a good man that his own perceptions are wrong so that Nicole can continue destroying his life without consequences. If you don't fix this, Amanda, you're not welcome in this family anymore. I mean it. We'll consider you dead to us. The threat should have hurt more than it did. A month ago, the idea of being permanently cut off from my family would have devastated me. But sitting in my beautiful home, financially secure and finally free from the obligation to enable their dysfunction, I felt mostly relief. Mom, you cut me off from this family the night I asked questions about Nicole's behavior. You made it clear then that family loyalty meant protecting lies, and I made it clear that I couldn't do that. Nothing has changed except that now Mike knows the truth he deserved to know all along. This conversation is over, my mother said. When you're ready to do the right thing, you know our number. She hung up before I could respond, leaving me sitting in my office with the phone in my hand and a strange sense of finality settling over me. That was it then. The last bridge burned, the final connection severed. I was officially orphaned by choice rather than circumstance, cast out not for doing something wrong, but for refusing to do something wrong. 2 hours later, my phone rang again. This time it was Mike, and his voice sounded hollow and exhausted. Amanda, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Of course. What is it? Did your parents put pressure on you to recant the evidence? Did they ask you to say it was fake or that you made it up? I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of the moment. Yes. My mother called earlier and asked me to tell you that I had misunderstood what I saw, that the evidence was fabricated or taken out of context. Jesus. Mike was quiet for a moment. So they knew. They all knew what Nicole was doing, and they were okay with it as long as I didn't find out. I'm sorry, Mike. I know that makes it worse. Actually, it makes it clearer. It tells me exactly what kind of people I've been calling family for the past 8 years. His voice was getting stronger, more resolved. Amanda, I need you to know that I've decided to file for divorce. I've already talked to a lawyer about the credit card fraud and the financial deception. I'm going to make sure Nicole faces real consequences for what she's done. How are you holding up with all this? Honestly, I'm angry. I'm hurt. But I'm also relieved. I've been feeling like something was wrong for months, questioning my own instincts, wondering why I felt so disconnected from my wife. Now I know it wasn't me. It wasn't something I was failing to do or be. It was her, lying to me every day, making me feel crazy for noticing that things didn't add up. Mike paused, and I could hear him taking a shaky breath. The worst part is the time. 2 years of my life that I can't get back. 2 years when I could have been building a real relationship with someone who actually wanted to be with me. 2 years when I was working overtime to save money for a house that Nicole was never planning to live in with me. I'm so sorry this happened to you. You deserved so much better. Thank you for giving me the chance to get better. Thank you for caring enough about me to risk your relationship with your family. Mike, there's something else you should know. My family didn't just know about Nicole's affairs. They've been actively helping her cover them up. When I first asked questions about her behavior, they immediately closed ranks to protect her secrets. They made it clear that asking for honesty was more offensive to them than Nicole's dishonesty itself. That explains why Nicole seemed so confident that she could weather this scandal. She thought she had backup, people who would help her, convince me that I was overreacting or misunderstanding the situation. What happens now? Now I take control of my own life for the first time in years. I've already moved my personal savings into a separate account. I've changed the passwords on all our shared accounts so Nicole can't do any more financial damage while the divorce is pending. And I've documented everything for my lawyer so we can pursue charges for the credit card fraud. I felt a surge of pride hearing Mike talk about taking action to protect himself. For too long, he had been the passive victim of Nicole's deceptions, working hard and trusting blindly while she took advantage of his good nature. Now he was fighting back, demanding accountability, refusing to accept being treated as a disposable convenience. Mike, is there anything I can do to help? I know you're facing legal expenses and probably some financial hardship because of Nicole's spending. Actually, there is something. My lawyer says it would be helpful to have testimony from someone who witnessed Nicole's suspicious behavior and can speak to the family's knowledge of her affairs. Would you be willing to give a deposition? Or testify if it comes to that? Absolutely. I'll do whatever you need me to do. Thank you. And Amanda? I want you to know that even though your family has decided to cut you off, you still have family. You still have me. What you did took courage, and it saved me from wasting more years of my life on someone who never deserved my love or trust. After I hung up with Mike, I sat in my quiet house and reflected on how dramatically my life had changed in just a few short weeks. I had lost the family I was born into, but I had gained something more valuable. The knowledge that I could live with integrity, that I could make hard choices based on principle rather than convenience, and that real family was about love and loyalty earned through consistent behavior rather than demanded through blood relation. That evening, I received a text message from a number I didn't recognize. This is Nicole. We need to talk. Meet me at Riverside Park tomorrow at 2 p.m. Come alone. I stared at that message for a long time, wondering what Nicole could possibly have to say to me at this point. Was she planning to apologize? To threaten me? To try one last manipulation to convince me to help her salvage her marriage? Whatever she wanted, I knew I needed to hear it. Not because I owed her anything, but because I wanted to see for myself who she had become. What kind of person could systematically betray someone who loved her and then blame the person who exposed that betrayal? I texted back, I'll be there. The next afternoon, I arrived at Riverside Park 15 minutes early and positioned myself on a bench with a clear view of the walking paths. Nicole arrived exactly on time, and I was struck by how different she looked. Gone was the confident, polished woman who had always seemed to glide through life without consequences. In her place was someone who looked tired, desperate, and older than her 32 years. She sat down on the opposite end of the bench, leaving several feet of space between us, and for a moment, neither of us spoke. Finally, she turned to face me with an expression I couldn't quite read. I hope you're happy, she said. I hope destroying. My life was everything you thought it would be. Nicole, I didn't destroy your life. You did that yourself when you decided to cheat on your husband and lie to everyone who cared about you. You had choices, Amanda. You could have talked to me first. You could have given me a chance to end things quietly. You could have handled this like family instead of hiring private investigators and gathering evidence like I was some kind of criminal. The audacity of her statement took my breath away. I tried talking to you, Nicole. That's what started this whole mess, remember? I asked you where you were really going, and instead of honesty, I got lies and manipulation. You had chances to end things quietly. You had 2 years of chances. You were always jealous of me, Nicole said, her voice taking on a familiar, whining quality that I remembered from childhood arguments. You were always looking for ways to tear me down, to make yourself feel better about your own failures. What failures would those be, Nicole? My failure to cheat on a faithful partner? My failure to steal money to fund secret affairs? My failure to manipulate everyone around me into covering up my lies? Nicole's composure cracked, and for the first time in our conversation, I saw real emotion in her face. You don't understand what it's been like being married to Mike. He's a good man, but he's boring. He's predictable. He comes home every night and wants to talk about his day and plan our future and act like we're going to be happy suburban parents forever. And that's a bad thing? It's not enough for me. I need excitement, passion, adventure. I need to feel alive, not like I'm slowly suffocating in some predetermined life that someone else designed for me. I looked at my sister, really looked at her, and realized that I was seeing her clearly for the first time in years. Nicole wasn't a victim of circumstance or a woman who had made some mistakes. She was someone who believed that her desires mattered more than other people's well-being, that her need for excitement justified any amount of deception and betrayal. Nicole, if you weren't happy in your marriage, you should have gotten divorced. If you wanted adventure and passion, you should have found them honestly. What you did instead was steal years from Mike's life, steal money from his bank account, and put his health at risk. You chose to be a liar and a thief rather than be honest about what you wanted. Easy for you to say. You've never been married. You've never had to make the compromises that come with building a life with another person. You're right, I haven't been married. But I know the difference between compromise and betrayal. I know the difference between working through problems together and lying about the fact that problems exist. Nicole stood up abruptly, pacing a few steps away from the bench before turning back to face me. What do you want from me, Amanda? Do you want me to grovel? Do you want me to admit that I'm a terrible person who doesn't deserve happiness? Do you want me to promise to change and become someone I'm not? I don't want anything from you, Nicole. I wanted Mike to know the truth about his marriage so he could make informed decisions about his life. That's all I ever wanted. Well, congratulations. Mission accomplished. Mike hates me. Mom and Dad are furious with both of us, and I'm probably going to lose everything in the divorce. I hope it was worth it. I thought about her question as she stood there waiting for my response. Was it worth it? Was exposing Nicole's lies worth losing my family? Worth dealing with their anger and accusations? Worth all the drama and pain that had followed? Yes, I said finally. It was worth it. Mike deserved to know the truth, and he deserved to hear it from someone who cared about him rather than discovering it some other way. You might hate me for that, and our parents might hate me for that, but I can live with myself knowing that I did the right thing. Nicole laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. The right thing. You always were so self-righteous, so convinced that your way of seeing things was the only valid perspective. Nicole, if being honest about adultery makes me self-righteous, then I guess I'm self-righteous. If refusing to help cover up financial fraud makes me judgmental, then I guess I'm judgmental. I'd rather be those things than be someone who enables abuse. Abuse? Really? That's what you're calling my marriage now? What would you call it when someone systematically lies to their partner, steals money from shared accounts, and puts their partner's health at risk without their knowledge or consent? Because most reasonable people would call that abuse. Nicole stared at me for a long moment, and I could see her processing the reality that I wasn't going to be swayed by guilt, trips, or manipulation. I wasn't going to apologize for exposing her behavior, and I wasn't going to help her minimize the consequences of her choices. You've really changed, she said finally. You used to be someone I could count on to keep family business private, someone who understood that loyalty mattered more than anything else. No, Nicole, I used to be someone who was afraid of your anger and Mom and Dad's disapproval. I used to be someone who valued being liked more than being honest, but I'm not that person anymore. As Nicole walked away from our meeting, I realized that this conversation had given me something I hadn't expected: closure. I now knew exactly who my sister was and what she was capable of. I knew that she felt no genuine remorse for the pain she had caused Mike, no real understanding of why her behavior was wrong. I knew that she saw herself as the victim in this situation, unfairly persecuted for pursuing her own happiness. And I knew that I had made the right choice in exposing her affairs, not just for Mike's sake, but for my own. Because living with the knowledge of what she was doing, enabling her behavior through my silence, would have made me complicit in her abuse of a good man. The reckoning was far from over. There would be legal proceedings, financial settlements, and probably years of family drama as the consequences of Nicole's choices continued to unfold. But I was ready for all of it, secure in the knowledge that I had chosen truth over comfort, justice over family loyalty, and integrity over the easy path. My grandmother had been right to trust me with her legacy. I was using it exactly as she had hoped, to stand up for what was right, regardless of the personal cost. 6 months after my confrontation with Nicole at Riverside Park, I was sitting in my lawyer's office reviewing documents that would fundamentally alter my family's financial landscape forever. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on me as Brian Cooper spread out papers across his conference table, each one representing a consequence my family had never seen coming. "The divorce proceedings concluded last week," Brian said, pulling out a folder marked with Mike's case number. Mike was awarded significant damages for the financial fraud, and Nicole has been ordered to pay restitution for the credit card debts she accumulated during her affairs. Since she doesn't have the assets to cover the full amount, the court has placed liens on any property she might acquire in the future. I nodded, feeling satisfied that Mike had finally received some measure of justice for the years of deception he had endured. But that wasn't the end of the story. What my family didn't know was that their treatment of me had triggered provisions in my grandmother's will that would reshape their lives completely. More importantly, Brian continued with a slight smile, "Your parents violated the terms of your grandmother's trust in spectacular fashion. Their attempts to pressure you into recanting evidence, their threats to disown you for refusing to cover up Nicole's affairs, and their explicit demand that you choose family loyalty over honesty constitute exactly the kind of manipulation your grandmother anticipated." He pulled out another set of documents, these ones bearing the official seal of the probate court. "As of yesterday, your parents' inheritance from Helen Carter's estate has been officially revoked. The house in Riverside, all of her personal possessions, and the small savings account they thought they were inheriting now belong to you." The news should have felt like a victory, but instead I experienced a complex mix of sadness and vindication. My grandmother had been right to build protections into her will. She had understood that my family would choose preservation of lies over support for truth, and she had planned accordingly. "What happens now?" I asked. "Now you decide what you want to do with the properties. The house in Riverside could be sold, rented, or you could live in it yourself if you chose to move back to town. The decision is entirely yours." I thought about that house, the place where I had grown up believing in the fairy tale of unconditional family love, the dining room where I had been attacked for asking honest questions, the kitchen where my mother had prepared countless meals while enabling Nicole's destructive behavior, the living room where my father had sat silently, choosing peace over principle every time. "I want to sell it," I said. "And I want to donate the proceeds to the Willow Creek Community Center to help fund their tutoring programs for people who are working to better their lives through education." Brian made notes in his file. "That's a generous donation that will make a real difference for people who need it. My grandmother always said that money should be used to build something meaningful. I can't think of anything more meaningful than helping people who are fighting for their own futures." Over the next few weeks, the reality of the inheritance revocation began to settle over my family like a slow-moving storm. My father called first, his voice shaky and confused as he tried to understand what had happened. "Amanda, honey, there's been some kind of mistake with your grandmother's will. The lawyer says we can't inherit the house because of some provision about family conflicts. Do you know anything about this? I was standing in my kitchen, looking out at the garden my grandmother had designed, feeling the weight of this moment. It's not a mistake, Dad. Grandma included protections in her will to ensure that her inheritance would go to people who shared her values about honesty and integrity. But sweetheart, we're your parents. We love you. That argument we had was just family business, just a disagreement about how to handle a difficult situation. Dad, you and Mom threatened to disown me if I didn't lie to Mike about Nicole's affairs. You asked me to gaslight a good man into believing that documented evidence of his wife's infidelity was somehow fake. That wasn't a disagreement about handling a difficult situation. That was asking me to be complicit in emotional abuse. The silence on the other end of the line stretched for so long that I wondered if the call had dropped. When my father finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. We were trying to protect our family. We were trying to keep everyone together. No, Dad. You were trying to protect Nicole from the consequences of her choices. You were willing to sacrifice Mike's well-being, my integrity, and basic honesty to avoid dealing with the fact that your favorite daughter had become someone who betrays the people who love her. Amanda, please, your mother and I have been counting on that inheritance to help us with retirement. We can't afford to lose the house. The desperation in his voice tugged at my heart, but it also crystallized everything I had learned about enabling behavior. My parents weren't facing consequences because I was vindictive or cruel. They were facing consequences because they had chosen to prioritize protecting lies over supporting truth, and my grandmother had anticipated exactly that choice. Dad, Grandma gave you multiple opportunities to choose differently. She watched you enable Nicole's behavior for years. She saw you dismiss my concerns and silence my questions. She knew that when push came to shove, you would choose family loyalty over moral integrity, and she planned accordingly. But we can change. We can do better. If you'll just talk to the lawyer, explain that we've learned from this situation. Dad, Mike's divorce has been finalized. Nicole has already moved to Seattle with her personal trainer boyfriend, leaving behind tens of thousands of dollars in debt that Mike is still dealing with. The consequences of your choices have already played out. You can't undo the damage by promising to do better in the future. My father was crying now, something I had rarely heard in my adult life. What are we supposed to do? We're too old to start over. We don't have anywhere else to go. You can rent an apartment. You can downsize your lifestyle. You can make the same adjustments that millions of people make when they face financial difficulties. You're not destitute, Dad. You're just not as comfortable as you thought you were going to be. Amanda, please. You're our daughter. We raised you. We loved you. We gave you everything we could. Doesn't that count for something? I closed my eyes, feeling the full weight of this conversation. Dad, it counts for a lot. But it doesn't count for more than Mike's right to know the truth about his marriage. It doesn't count for more than basic honesty and integrity. And it doesn't count for more than the values that Grandma spent her whole life trying to teach us. When I hung up the phone, I sat in my quiet house and grieved for the family I had lost. Not the family as they actually were, but the family I had believed them to be when I was younger and more naive. The family that existed in childhood memories of holiday dinners and birthday celebrations, before I understood that love could be conditional and loyalty could be weaponized. A week later, I received an unexpected visitor. Mike appeared at my front door on a Saturday morning, holding a bouquet of flowers and wearing a smile I hadn't seen from him in years. "These are for you," he said, offering me the flowers. A thank you gift for giving me my life back. Mike, you didn't need to bring me anything. How are you doing? I'm great, actually. Better than I've been in years. He looked different somehow, younger and more confident than the man I had met at the cafe 6 months earlier. The divorce is final. Nicole is out of my life permanently. And I've started dating someone new. Someone honest, someone kind, someone who actually wants to be with me. That's wonderful. I'm so happy for you. Amanda, I want you to know that what you did changed everything for me. Not just exposing Nicole's affairs, but showing me that there are people in the world who will stand up for what's right, even when it costs them something. You gave me hope that real love and real loyalty actually exist. We sat on my front porch, drinking coffee and talking about his new life, his new relationship, and his plans for the future. As he prepared to leave, Mike turned to me with a serious expression. I heard about what happened with your parents' inheritance. I know this whole situation has cost you your family. I didn't lose my family, Mike. I lost people who claimed to be family but weren't willing to act like it when it mattered. Well, for what it's worth, you gained something too. You gained my respect, my gratitude, and my friendship for life. If you ever need anything at all, I want you to know that you can count on me. As Mike drove away, I realized that he was right. I had gained something through this experience. I had gained the knowledge that I could live according to my values even when it was difficult. I had gained financial independence that allowed me to make choices based on principle rather than necessity. I had gained clarity about what real family meant and what kinds of relationships were worth maintaining. Most importantly, I had gained the understanding that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone is refuse to enable their destructive behavior, even when that refusal comes at a personal cost. 3 months later, I received a letter, forwarded from my old address. It was from Nicole, postmarked from Seattle, written on expensive stationery that probably cost more than she could afford given her financial situation. Amanda, the letter began, I'm writing to let you know that Marcus and I are engaged. We're planning a small wedding next spring, and despite everything that's happened, I wanted you to know because you're still my sister. The letter went on to describe her new life in Seattle, her job at a marketing firm, and her excitement about starting fresh with someone who understands her need for excitement and adventure. There was no acknowledgement of the pain she had caused Mike, no recognition of the financial damage she had left behind, no indication that she had learned anything from the consequences of her choices. But what struck me most about the letter was the postscript. I hope someday you'll understand that family should come first and that loyalty matters more than being right. I read that line several times, marveling at Nicole's continued inability to understand that real loyalty includes holding the people you love accountable for harmful behavior. Real family means caring enough about someone to refuse to enable their worst impulses. Real love sometimes requires difficult conversations and uncomfortable truths. I didn't respond to Nicole's letter. There was nothing left to say between us, no common ground to find, no relationship worth salvaging. She had chosen her path, and I had chosen mine, and those paths would never intersect again in any meaningful way. Instead, I folded the letter and placed it in a box with other mementos from my old life. Reminders of who I used to be when I believed that keeping peace was more important than speaking truth, when I thought that family loyalty meant protecting lies, when I was afraid to stand up for what was right because I might face consequences for doing so. That afternoon, I drove to Riverside for the final time to oversee the sale of my childhood home. The new owners were a young couple with 2 small children, and they were excited about the possibilities the house represented for their growing family. As I watched them walk through the rooms, pointing out where they would put the Christmas tree and discussing plans for the backyard, I felt a sense of completion. The house would be loved again, filled with laughter and honesty, and the kind of family bonds that could weather difficult times because they were built on truth rather than convenience. The money from the sale would help fund education programs for people who were working to improve their lives, carrying forward my grandmother's belief that resources should be used to build something meaningful. Standing in the driveway for the last time, looking at the house where I had learned both the importance of family and the limits of family loyalty, I thought about the journey that had brought me to this moment. 6 months ago, I had been cast out for asking uncomfortable questions. Today, I was financially independent, emotionally free, and surrounded by relationships based on mutual respect rather than blood obligation. My grandmother had been right about so many things. Truth did matter more than comfort. Integrity was worth more than approval. Real family was something you built rather than something you were born into. And sometimes the greatest gift you could give someone was the courage to face reality, even when that reality was painful. As I drove back to Portland, back to my beautiful house and my meaningful work and my chosen family of people who valued honesty and kindness, I felt the deep satisfaction that comes from living according to your values regardless of the cost. They had disciplined me for asking about their affairs, casting me out for refusing to enable destructive behavior. In return, I had disciplined their bank accounts, their assumptions about unconditional family loyalty, and their belief that love meant never having to face consequences for harmful choices. The reckoning was complete, and justice had been served with the compound interest my grandmother had so carefully planned. Sometimes the universe really does reward people who refuse to compromise their integrity, even when that refusal costs them everything they thought they wanted. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.